Admiral Vex stood on the bridge of the Imperial flagship Dominion, staring at the holographic display of the unremarkable blue planet designated Sol 3, Earth, as the locals called it. The latest conquest for the galactic hegemony. Their military capabilities are primitive at best, reported Commander Trell, reviewing the intelligence gathered over the past solar cycle. No faster-than-light travel, limited orbital defenses, and fractured planetary governance. This should be a standard Class 4 annexation. Vex's 6 eyes narrowed. Something about this assessment troubled him. And yet they've survived 3 extinction-level events in their brief evolutionary history. That speaks to an unusual resilience. Mere luck, Trell dismissed. Their most advanced weapons wouldn't scratch our secondary shields. The annexation protocol was straightforward. Neutralize military command centers, disable communication networks, and establish occupation zones. Within a standard week, Earth would become the newest resource world in the Empire's ever-expanding portfolio. The natives would be assigned labor quotas based on their capabilities, with the most promising specimens relocated for specialized service. Deploy the advanced forces, Vex ordered. I want control of their orbital space and major command centers within 12 hours. Civilian casualties should be minimized. They're more valuable as workers. The first Imperial ships descended through Earth's atmosphere with practiced precision. Their targets: military bases in regions called United States, China, Russia, and others identified as power centers. Resistance was expected to be fierce but brief. It wasn't. The Imperial forces found abandoned bases, empty command centers, and disabled weaponry. They encountered token resistance, easily crushed, but nowhere near the expected military response from a planet of 8 billion inhabitants. Something's wrong, Vex muttered as reports flooded in. Where are their fighters, their military leaders? The answer came 3 days later when Imperial forces began establishing civilian processing centers in major population zones. The plan was simple: register humans, implant tracking devices, and begin resource extraction operations. In a settlement called Portland, an Imperial officer named Drax was overseeing the processing of civilians. A human male stepped forward, older, with graying hair and stooped shoulders. Nothing remarkable about him. Name? Drax demanded, barely looking up from his processing tablet. Jack, the human replied. Occupation? Gardener. Drax waved him toward the implantation station, already focusing on the next human in line. Jack shuffled forward, seemingly compliant. As he passed Drax, his movement suddenly changed, fluid, lightning fast. Before anyone could react, he had disabled 3 Imperial guards with precise strikes to vulnerabilities in their armor that no primitive species should have identified. Similar scenes unfolded across the globe as seemingly ordinary humans, teachers, mechanics, office workers, transformed into lethal combatants. What the Empire had failed to understand was that Earth's militaries hadn't surrendered or been destroyed. They had disappeared, blending seamlessly into the civilian population. General Lisa Thompson, formerly of the United States Special Forces, now posing as a librarian, watched from a cafe window as chaos erupted at the Imperial Processing Center across the street. Her team had struck simultaneously in 12 locations across North America, and according to the encrypted communications coming through her disguised neural implant, similar operations were succeeding globally. Phase 1 complete, she murmured into her coffee cup, the ceramic subtly vibrating, to transmit her voice without detectable sound waves. Initiate Phase 2. Throughout the city, ordinary objects began transforming. Mailboxes revealed weapon caches. Sewer access points opened to reveal underground command centers. What appeared to be homeless people pushed shopping carts that contained sophisticated communication equipment. Everything had been prepared in the 3 months since Earth's governments had detected the Imperial fleet approaching the solar system. The Empire had expected conventional warfare. They weren't prepared for 8 billion potential combatants, with no clear military to target. Status report from Alpha teams? Lisa asked, still appearing to any observer as a middle-aged woman enjoying her morning coffee while reading a physical book. Another quirk of human culture the Imperials dismissed as primitive. 42 processing centers neutralized, came the reply through her neural implant. Captured Imperial tech is being analyzed. Casualty rate within acceptable parameters. Across the globe, Earth's military personnel, who had discarded uniforms and identification weeks ago, were executing the carefully planned response. The strategy wasn't to win through superior firepower, which Earth lacked, but through superior deception and knowledge of the terrain. In Moscow, a man who appeared to be a subway maintenance worker led a team that infiltrated an Imperial command post through underground tunnels. In Beijing, what the Imperials thought was a routine delivery of food supplies contained elite operatives who disabled a communication relay. In Rio, Lagos, and Mumbai, similar operations unfolded. Admiral Vex stared in disbelief at the reports flooding the Dominion's command center. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Their military bases were empty." Commander Trell's expression darkened. "It appears we misinterpreted their defense strategy. They abandoned centralized military infrastructure and dispersed their forces among the civilian population." "That's unheard of," Vex said. "No species would willingly surrender their military assets and rely on guerrilla tactics against a superior force. Humans would," said an Imperial xenobiologist who had been studying Earth's history. "Their military history is filled with examples of unconventional warfare. The Vietnamese rice farmers who defeated a superpower. The Afghan shepherds who exhausted two global powers. They've evolved to excel at asymmetric combat. On Earth, Phase 2 was accelerating. Imperial ships found their navigation systems compromised by seemingly primitive electronic attacks that exploited vulnerabilities the humans shouldn't have been able to identify. Landing zones suddenly became kill zones. Imperial soldiers discovered that their armor, designed to withstand energy weapons, had fatal weaknesses against kinetic projectiles fired from specific angles. Knowledge that human fighters seemed to possess instinctively. The Empire was fighting shadows. Enemies who disappeared into crowds, who struck and vanished, who looked like harmless civilians until the moment they attacked. The Imperial command ship Dominion shuddered as another systems failure cascaded through its network. Admiral Vex slammed his fist against the holographic display, causing the image to momentarily distort. "How have they infiltrated our systems?" he demanded. "Their technology is centuries behind ours." Commander Trell's expression was grim. "It appears they're not hacking our systems directly. They're using our own protocols against us. The processing centers we established are being used to introduce corrupted data into our network." The humans had realized something fundamental about the Imperial approach. The Empire's greatest strength, its standardized, efficient systems, was also its greatest vulnerability. By capturing a few Imperial datapads and studying their interfaces, Earth's tech specialists had identified exploitable patterns. On the ground, the resistance was growing bolder. In what was once called Chicago, Tom Miller, former Navy SEAL now posing as a construction worker, led a team that had captured an Imperial scout ship. Imperial technology was designed to recognize authorized users based on biometric signatures that, theoretically, humans couldn't replicate. But they didn't need to replicate them. They just needed to capture them intact. "She's purring like a kitten," Tom said, running his hands over the alien controls. After 2 weeks of study, Earth's pilots had figured out the basics of Imperial navigation systems. "Tell Command we're ready for Operation Trojan." The plan was audacious. Use captured Imperial vessels to approach the orbital command stations, then deploy special teams trained in zero-gravity combat. The Empire never expected to be fighting their own ships. Admiral Vex wasn't the only one, facing unexpected challenges. Throughout the Imperial fleet, commanding officers were discovering that human behavior defied their standard conquest models. "They're using children as spotters," reported an exasperated field commander from a region called Australia. "Actual juveniles, monitoring our movements and disappearing before we can track them. The ones classified as elderly are constructing improvised explosives," came another report from Europe. "We captured one with 64 solar cycles who had rigged a devastating trap that took out an entire squad." What the Empire failed to understand was that humans had been preparing for this moment throughout their violent history. Every human child had grown up on stories of resistance against overwhelming odds, from ancient tales of David versus Goliath to modern films about rebels fighting galactic empires. Humanity had rehearsed this scenario in their collective imagination for generations. In orbit, Imperial analysts were finally beginning to understand the scope of the threat. "They're not just random guerrilla fighters," said the chief intelligence officer. This is a coordinated global response. They've distributed their command structure to make it impossible to decapitate their leadership. Each cell operates independently, but follows a master strategy. What the Empire couldn't grasp was how deeply ingrained adaptive combat was in human nature. Throughout their evolution, humans had been both predator and prey. They had developed pattern recognition abilities that let them identify weaknesses in seconds. Their threat assessment capabilities, honed over thousands of years of constant warfare, gave them an instinctive understanding of Imperial vulnerabilities. As Imperial losses mounted, Admiral Vex faced an uncomfortable reality. This simple annexation was becoming the Empire's most costly engagement in centuries, and the humans were just getting started. 3 weeks into the occupation, Imperial forces were in disarray. What had begun as a standard annexation had devolved into a nightmare of attrition, with Imperial soldiers increasingly fearful of the civilians they were supposed to be processing. In what humans called the Pentagon, now an Imperial regional headquarters, Major Draz addressed his increasingly nervous troops. "Remember your training," he insisted. "These are primitives. They have no unified military, no advanced weapons. Their apparent success is statistical anomaly, nothing more." But his soldiers had seen enough to know better. They'd witnessed civilians transforming from compliant workers to lethal fighters in seconds. They'd seen Imperial tech, the pride of the hegemony, turned against them by species who supposedly couldn't comprehend it. On the Dominion, Admiral Vex had initiated emergency protocols. "We need reinforcements," he informed the Imperial High Command. "Request permission to escalate to Class 2 pacification measures." The response was immediate and unexpected. "Request denied. Explain failure to complete standard annexation of primitive world." The Empire's reputation was built on efficient conquest. Admitting that a pre-FTL species was effectively resisting would damage Imperial prestige throughout the galaxy. Vex was on his own. Meanwhile, Earth's resistance had moved to Phase 3. In the mountains of what was once called Afghanistan, Ryan Adams, formerly with British Special Forces, oversaw the deployment of captured Imperial weaponry. "Remember, short bursts only," he instructed the fighters. "Their energy signatures can be traced if we use continuous fire." The humans had not only captured Imperial weapons, they'd improved them. By studying the underlying technology, Earth scientists had identified inefficiencies in the design, flaws that the standardized Imperial engineering process had overlooked for centuries. In Tokyo, what appeared to be a routine civilian processing line concealed a devastating surprise. As Imperial officers activated their scanning equipment, they failed to notice that the civilians were carrying modified kitchen items, ceramic knives that didn't trigger metal detectors, pressure cookers repurposed as EMP devices. Within minutes, another Imperial outpost went dark. The Empire's occupation force was designed for efficiency, not extended combat against an entrenched population. Their supply lines were stretched thin. Their combat doctrine relied on overwhelming force and quick capitulation, neither of which was working against humans who seemed to have been psychologically prepared for alien invasion through centuries of speculative fiction. In orbit, the situation was becoming critical. Operation Trojan had succeeded beyond expectations. Human fighters aboard captured vessels had managed to dock with 3 Imperial command platforms. Using tactics developed by Earth's naval boarding parties over centuries of maritime warfare, they had seized control of vital systems. "Sir, we've lost contact with the orbital platforms in Sectors 3, 7, and 9, reported a communications officer on the Dominion. "Impossible," Vex muttered. But he was no longer surprised by human ingenuity. These creatures had an uncanny ability to identify and exploit weaknesses that no other species would even consider. What the Empire never understood was that humans had been fighting against superior forces throughout their history. Their entire military evolution was based not on technological superiority, but on asymmetric advantage, finding the unexpected approach that neutralized an enemy's strength. As Imperial casualties mounted and more outposts went dark, Vex faced a decision that no Imperial admiral had made in living memory, whether to admit defeat or double down on a failing strategy. Day 40 of the occupation. Imperial forces had consolidated into defensive positions, abandoning the pretense of civilian processing and resource extraction. What had begun as a conquest had become a desperate holding action. On the Dominion, Admiral Vex received the message he had been dreading. Explain continued failure, or face immediate replacement. The Empire did not tolerate failure, especially against technologically inferior species. If he were relieved of command, his replacement would likely implement extreme measures: orbital bombardment, biological weapons, tactics that would render Earth's resources useless but salvage Imperial pride. We need to understand them better, Vex told his inner circle. Our models of their behavior are fundamentally flawed. He authorized a risky operation: capture high-value human fighters for direct interrogation. Imperial special forces deployed to locations where resistance had been most effective, seeking to understand the humans' organizational structure. In the ruins of London, they succeeded in capturing Kate Wilson, who appeared to be leading regional operations. Despite sophisticated interrogation techniques, she revealed nothing of value, only increasingly creative insults in multiple human languages. What the Imperials failed to realize was that she wasn't actually a military leader. Before the invasion, she had been a history professor specializing in resistance movements. When the Imperial fleet was detected, she had simply applied her knowledge practically. This pattern repeated across the globe. The humans had no traditional chain of command to disrupt. Their resistance was organized around principles rather than individuals, making it impossible to cripple through targeted removals. Meanwhile, human understanding of Imperial technology was growing exponentially. In hidden labs around the planet, captured equipment was being reverse-engineered by scientists working alongside military specialists. Humans lacked the manufacturing capacity to replicate the technology fully, but they could understand and modify it with startling speed. In a repurposed mineshaft in South Africa, Dr. Alan Martinez, a physicist who now posed as a maintenance worker, made a breakthrough. The Imperial translation matrix doesn't just convert language, he explained to the assembled fighters. It reveals their thought patterns. They think linearly, sequentially. They cannot process multiple conflicting inputs simultaneously. This insight led to a new tactic: deliberate information chaos. Humans began broadcasting contradictory data on frequencies the Imperials monitored. They staged fake operations to draw attention while executing real ones elsewhere. They created false patterns to waste Imperial analytical resources. For a species that relied on logical processing and clear data hierarchies, this cognitive warfare was devastating. Imperial commanders couldn't distinguish reliable intelligence from false flags. Their decision-making slowed to a crawl. On day 45, human forces launched Operation Babel, a simultaneous attack on all remaining Imperial communication nodes, each using different tactics tailored to local conditions. In the Amazon, fighters used the dense jungle to approach undetected. In the Arabian desert, they came with sandstorms. In Canadian forests, they moved through snow that their bodies had evolved to navigate efficiently. The result was catastrophic for Imperial forces. Without coordinated communication, their standardized responses became predictable and exploitable. The humans seemed to anticipate their tactics before they even deployed them. Admiral Vex, watching his occupation force crumble, finally understood the fundamental error in the Empire's approach. The hegemony conquered through superior technology and standardized tactics, but humans conquered through superior adaptation. Each failure taught them. Each encounter made them more dangerous. The Empire had awakened something ancient and terrifying in human nature: the instinct to unite against external threats, the ability to transform daily objects into weapons, and the stubborn refusal to accept defeat regardless of odds. 2 months into what should have been a routine annexation, the Imperial forces were in full retreat. What remained of their ground troops had withdrawn to fortified positions around their landing craft, preparing for evacuation. The orbital platforms had been either captured by human fighters or disabled by makeshift missiles cobbled together from captured Imperial technology. Admiral Vex faced the most difficult decision of his career. The logical choice was orbital bombardment. Sterilize the planet's surface and report that the humans had triggered their own extinction through nuclear warfare. The Empire would lose the resources of Earth but save face. But something stopped him. In all his years of service, he had never encountered a species like humans. Their resilience, their adaptability, their sheer inventiveness deserved more than extinction. Prepare for direct negotiation, he ordered, shocking his command staff. Commander Trell objected immediately. The Empire does not negotiate with pre-FTL species. It violates the fundamental doctrine of the hegemony. The fundamental doctrine has failed us here, Vex replied. We must adapt or perish, a lesson these humans have taught us rather painfully. On Earth, the human resistance leaders received the unexpected communication with skepticism. General Thompson, emerging from her librarian cover, convened a global council through the communication network they had established using modified Imperial technology. It could be a trap, warned Tom from his captured scout ship, now patrolling Earth's upper atmosphere. Or it could be the first step towards something unprecedented, Kate countered, having escaped Imperial custody through methods that had impressed even her captors. The Empire has never negotiated with the species they intended to conquer. This represents a fundamental shift in their approach. The decision was made. Earth would talk, but from a position of strength, not submission. The meeting location was symbolic. The United Nations headquarters in New York, one of the few major structures left relatively intact during the fighting. Admiral Vex arrived with minimal escort, a gesture of good faith that wasn't lost on the human representatives. What struck him immediately was the diversity of the delegation. Unlike the homogeneous leadership of the Empire, humans of different colors, ages, and genders sat at the table. Their strength seemed to derive from their differences rather than their similarities. Your species has accomplished what no other has done in the 12,000-year history of the Empire, Vex began. You have forced us to reconsider our fundamental assumptions about sentient development. General Thompson's response was measured. We didn't want this fight, but we've spent our entire evolutionary history preparing for it nonetheless. The negotiations lasted 3 days. What emerged was unprecedented. Earth would not be annexed or conquered. Instead, it would enter the galactic community as a protected developing world, with limited technology transfer under strict supervision. In private, Vex confessed to Thompson the truth that would never appear in official records. If we had continued this conflict, there's a significant probability that your species would have reverse-engineered our faster-than-light drives within a year. Within 5 years, you might have reached our homeworld. The Empire has encountered thousands of species, but never one that adapts so quickly to new threats and opportunities. The agreement was formalized with both human and Imperial protocols, a dual system that acknowledged the unique nature of this arrangement. As Imperial forces prepared for final withdrawal, humans began the process of rebuilding. But they also began preparing. The knowledge gained during the occupation, Imperial technology, tactics, weaknesses, was preserved and developed. Schools incorporated new physics understanding derived from captured tech. Military academies studied Imperial combat doctrines to develop countermeasures. Earth had won its first interstellar conflict, but humanity harbored no illusions. The galaxy was vast and likely filled with threats they couldn't yet imagine. They would be ready next time, not just as guerrilla fighters blending into civilian populations, but as a species taking its first confident steps into the wider universe. 5 years after the Imperial withdrawal, Earth had changed profoundly. The knowledge gained from studying Imperial technology had accelerated human development by centuries. Limited faster-than-light communication allowed Earth to establish preliminary diplomatic contacts with other species in nearby systems, many of whom were surprised to learn that the mighty hegemony had been forced to retreat from a pre-FTL world. Admiral Vex, against all expectations, had not been executed for his failure. Instead, he had been reassigned to a remote outpost where his unorthodox experience with humans could be studied without undermining Imperial doctrine. His reports on human adaptability had been classified at the highest levels, accessible only to the Imperial Inner Council. On Earth, the distinction between civilian and military had been permanently blurred. The strategy that had saved them, distributed defense with no clear military targets, had become formalized into a new global protection doctrine. Every community maintained its defensive capabilities beneath a peaceful exterior. Humanity would never again present obvious military targets to a potential invader. General Lisa Thompson, now serving as Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Council, carried this philosophy into her diplomatic work. Humans don't distinguish between fighters and civilians the way other species do, she explained to a gathering of xeno-diplomatic specialists. Any human can become a warrior when necessary, then return to peaceful pursuits when the threat passes. It's written into our evolutionary history. We were both predator and prey, both conqueror and conquered. We contain multitudes. This concept was difficult for other species to grasp, particularly those with rigid caste systems or specialized evolutionary paths. The idea that a being could be both a scholar and a soldier, both a creator and a destroyer, seemed contradictory rather than complementary. Back on Earth, the integration of imperial technology had birthed new industries. Humans had proven remarkably adept at not just copying alien tech but improving it. Imperial energy systems, designed for stability and standardization, were modified by human engineers to deliver greater power at the cost of slightly increased risk, a trade-off that perfectly encapsulated the difference between human and imperial approaches to technology. Tom Miller, now commanding Earth's first faster-than-light scout ship, reflected on this as his vessel patrolled the edge of the solar system. The ship incorporated both imperial and human design philosophies, alien efficiency tempered by human intuition, and redundancy. Contact at extreme range, reported his sensor officer. Configuration matches Imperial Deep Space Fleet. The crew tensed, but Tom remained calm. Standard greeting protocols. Let's remind them why they left in the first place. The approaching Imperial vessel responded with unexpected deference. It was a diplomatic mission, not a military one, bringing formal recognition of Earth's sovereign status under galactic law, an unprecedented concession from the hegemony. The real victory, however, wasn't in the diplomatic recognition. It was in the subtle shift in how the galaxy perceived humanity. They weren't just another conquered world, or even a troublesome exception. They represented something more dangerous, an idea that could spread. Already, reports suggested that other worlds under Imperial control were adopting human-style resistance tactics. The concept of distributed defense, of power hidden beneath the appearance of submission, was spreading through the hegemony's territories like a virus. In the Imperial capital, the Inner Council debated this disturbing development. The humans have weaponized their very nature, observed the eldest counselor. Their apparent weakness, their lack of specialization, their chaotic individuality, conceals their true strength. On Earth, humanity continued its preparations. The brief conflict with the Empire had united the planet in ways that no internal crisis had ever managed. Old national boundaries remained, but held less significance in a species now defined by its relationship to the stars. Research centers around the globe studied captured Imperial technology, not just for military applications, but for solutions to age-old human problems: clean energy, environmental restoration, medical advances. Humanity took alien tools designed for conquest and repurposed them for creation, another distinctly human trait. And throughout human space, an ancient strategy evolved into a modern doctrine. The most dangerous fighter doesn't look like a fighter at all. The most effective defense isn't visible until it's needed. And the species that appears most vulnerable may, in fact, be the most deadly when threatened. The Empire had learned this lesson at great cost. The rest of the galaxy would soon discover that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their growing fleet or their advancing technology. It was their ability to be both civilized and fierce, both creators and destroyers, both individuals and a unified force, all at the same time. The Empire had expected to find simple civilians to conquer. Instead, they had awakened Earth's fiercest fighters. They wouldn't make that mistake again, and neither would anyone else.